Meeting for the Planning Commission for Monday, August 5th is called to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, is there anybody in the audience who would like to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Okay. Any requests for continuances, withdrawals, or additions? No? Moving on. How about conflicts or ex parte communications? Anybody? No? Okay, let's move on to the approval of the minutes for the, what was the date? July 1st, 2019.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the July 1st meeting as presented.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So, on to item 2. Amendment to the Title 11 zoning ordinance on sign regulations. Do we want to have any discussion beforehand, or anything? Do you have any?
I reviewed. I don't have any questions about it.
Okay. I do. I reviewed it quite extensively, and I met with Holly earlier today, and we went over a lot of the things that I found, most of it having to do with formatting and references that were carried over from the previous one to this one without being updated to the new layout. And also, I was concerned that the
Jack?
layout.
I was gonna just mention that I've addressed a few of some of your comments in my staff report. If you would want to address those later in more detail, I know that we'll have some time to do that.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and do that, and
All
then
right.
we'll be caught up with where you are.
Very good. Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Holly Owen, Planning Director here for the City of Solvang. We're here tonight to take public comment and hold a hearing on a request and recommendation to City Council, changes to the zoning ordinance, Title 11, Zoning Regulations, Chapter 13, Sign Regulations. For background in this issue, it's mentioned in the staff report, Solvang sign standards are a hybrid of typical requirements for sign size, lettering, illumination, and placement, such as seen in many other cities, but we have a unique requirement and expectation in Solvang for a particular type of design and aesthetic. Solvang's roots are in the county ordinance, and the practice of the review and of approval comes from that time. And a summary of the section in the staff report shows that the practice of that review by the county and then carried on into the city practices has been fairly consistent. There was a review process internally, and then it would go to a review board if it was in the village, a commercial area. This was the case for not only the county but the city practice with the BAR. Staff released an RFP in March of 2019 at council request to obtain proposals from planning and design firms to update the design guidelines, the community design element of the general plan, and the sign ordinance. After several consultants communicated with the city that the task was too large for the budget and time frame, staff received council direction to undertake a revision of the sign ordinance in-house. Direction was given to planning staff to create a path using the existing sign ordinance as the document to administratively approve certain signs by adhering to the standards and guidelines set forth in the sign ordinance. This was not meant as an update to the sign ordinance, nor does it replace what would be a complete overhaul of the ordinance. The last update, as many of you probably remember, was done in 2011, 2012, and was done by a subcommittee, which included several community meetings and took a better part of the year to accomplish. To accomplish these revisions that we did, however, staff has determined best practices from other cities, reduced the ordinance by 11 pages, and made changes to the sign ordinance with the following goals: that these changes give applicants a path to a streamlined approval process, that we have the in-house experience to review those signs, as the assistant planner has been reviewing signs for the BAR for the last several years, and that staff will work closely with any design team hired in the future for updating the design guidelines or community design element to ensure consistency within the documents, clarification as to the type of style that would work best with the community, as well as to add elements to deliver a clean graphics package to the ordinance and to the public. The red line version that you have represents a fundamental change in the review and approval process. This change allows for administrative approval of signs that meet our requirements. In addition, the following changes are proposed: eliminations of standards for signs on benches, elimination of signs on kiosks on private property, the inclusion of 2 flagpoles and flags attached to the building to be exempt, umbrella signage and menu case approvals as over-the-counter approvals. A relocated sign is now allowed with planning staff approval, and staff will continue the practice of approving new temporary signage while approval for a permanent sign is pending. Since the meeting of July 8th, I have a small list of what I call errors and omissions here. Several recommendations have been made to clarify or correct the proposed ordinance in front of you. The reinsertion of the original design requirements is referenced by Susan Williams at the July 8th City Council meeting as follows in section 11.13.9. Within the TRC area, signs shall be designed to enhance the special character of the village and the buildings on which they were placed. Individual lettering in the traditional old world style is preferred. So that language will carry over with the various types of signs as was in the original sign ordinance, and that was brought before City Council and discussed. The inclusion of change in reference regarding illumination. The reference to 11.13.7.1M in your draft should now be 11.13.6.1M, as well as other various changes to be made to double check those references, as you mentioned, and adhere to standard codification formatting. A discussion of the term Old World vernacular as proposed under definitions. That was an addition since the council, but it's been discussed frequently as a phrase in need of some sort of definition, and so I made an attempt at that, and if I would welcome any input that you may have on that. And finally, there's a planning department versus planning director change that I made to reflect the inclusiveness of that process to include the planning department, but I was told the authority and the responsibility according to the municipal code rest with me, the planning director, not the planning department. So that change was in no way meant to diffuse that responsibility or ownership of that, and I'll change the wording back to the original designation of planning director as the ultimate authority and decision maker. With that, I think that covers my staff report comments, and I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
So, would it be appropriate to make those corrections as you stated and bring it back to the planning commission to review with basically a clean document?
That is certainly one of your options that you have tonight, yes.
See that. Maybe before we have discussion of that, we can allow the audience to, I know, I'm Robert Clark, I'm sorry.
Just for the record.
Thank you.
Okay, you're looking at an old fossil here. I was one of the members of the committee that did the incorporation findings for the city and ran the election, and it passed. I was one of the people that sat on the General Plan Advisory Committee, and that was a long process. I was one of the people that wrote the original sign ordinance. And I find it a little discouraging that the people that actually make use of this ordinance, meaning the BAR, have not been included in the process at this time. And I think all of this should go back to them. They know this the old document. They would like to see what the new document is going to do and how the signs are going to be handled from now on. As much as I love our staff, we may not always have these people. We may have somebody that has outrageous ideas of what a sign should look like in Solvang. And I do not feel comfortable leaving it up to staff and somebody like Brenda to make the decision for all the signs. I think that they can, pass them on and say we approve these, and then pass them on to BAR for one final look for a stamp of approval. But I've seen too many times when people have come into cities and they do not have the same mindset as the residents that live there, and things get kind of gnarly. So I would encourage you to forward this on to the BAR, let them have a look-see, maybe they'll have fresh eyes and have some good input before you pass it on back to the City Council for approval. I really don't care what other cities do. This is Solvang. We're unique. We are one of the Danish capitals of the United States of America. And I don't want to lose the uniqueness which is shown by the signs we have, by the designs of the buildings we have, and just the ambience of the community. So please don't just let this stop with you and then have it go back to the City Council. Please pass it on to the BAR for their input, because this is their baby. Signs are their baby. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Anybody else like to speak? All right, then we'll bring it back to the commission.
I did have one question, Holly, on the second page before it goes into the ABCs, the 11-13-2 purpose and intent. I can never remember the TRC. I know it stands for tourism commercial.
Tourist-related commercial.
Tourist-related commercial. So I was just thinking, because it says tourist commercial zone district and it says TRC, and TRC is heavily prevalent throughout the whole thing, removing village, the village, I would recommend saying tourist. Was it? We
would recommend spelling it out then, or at least the first
exactly.
reference to it,
that
and
would
then
be
moving.
just to make it clear.
Sure.
Because I can never remember what it is. Tourist residential commercial. And then that definition on the that one you mentioned in your report. I just wanted to see what the definition was for the old world vernacular.
It is inserted for you to review. It's
Attachment D.
is it? Do you have it?
It's the second attachment. I looked for it. I read it this morning and I went through everything, but I just didn't see that part. Thank you, Brenda.
I could read it out loud too, if that's helpful.
We don't have it out here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yes, Old World Vernacular, this is just a proposed language. A style supported by Solvang design guidelines reminiscent of a type of font and use of color imitating that which was used in Northern European cities and towns in the 1700s to 1900s, especially in Denmark.
I was reading
The previous one, and it wasn't there, okay.
Okay. That's my attempt. I think we've looked online. We've talked about it internally as to how to define Old World Vernacular, because it comes up again, not only in the sign ordinance but in the design guidelines. But
Yeah, it's mentioned in a lot of our zoning, and
it is. So
so in I agree. I haven't seen a definition of it before, so
That was
at least
my-
you're making an attempt.
That was my English major attempt at it. I'm open to any other recommendations if you think that that's too narrow or not specific enough. But I felt like people in the future may want at least some guideline. One thing I will mention too is that Brenda and I have talked about materials that will accompany the approval process and material for applicants to review. So we intend to have examples, colored examples in a brochure or a handout that will illustrate the type of signage that we have traditionally approved, and some of the maybe even some of the variations to that, as well as a recommended color palette, which should ideally be helpful for new applicants.
And ultimately, that would be attached to this as opposed to just available if somebody asks for it.
If somebody asks for it, it would certainly be something that we could provide. Yes, I think that in terms of codification, to start, and my intent was always to have graphics or illustrations of what we mean by a wall sign, what we mean by some of the other types, projecting signs, that kind of thing. But we've taken out the dated photographs, the grainy photographs that were in there currently, just because we knew we would want to be inserting either sketches or renderings that were cleaner and fresher within that document. Now, when it comes to color in an ordinance, that's not usually done. It's just difficult for codification. So we'll have that always as handouts, and those may change over time, because this is, after all, a little bit of fashion and a little bit of style. So over time, you'll want the ability to freshen those up without going back and revising your sign ordinance.
I think that having the sample or the drawing there would be extremely helpful.
Good, thank
I had a
you.
quick question on 11-13-1 point P as in Paul.
Let's see, 1113.
That's the title. So 11 standard regulations. So 11-13-1. Oh,
It's titled.
Oh, 6-1. 6-1.
6. Sorry. 6
Okay, that's all right. Yes, P.
Then P.
Murals.
Display cases.
Oh, display cases. Okay.
Display cases are permitted with approval. Such display cases shall not exceed 20 square feet.
That was taken out of the previous sign ordinance, the current sign ordinance. So,
Just want to make sure that was not an error.
does that? Do you have a comment about that?
It just seems like a really, really big display case, 20 square feet. But
2 by 10,
maybe.
5 by 4.
It's difficult to know. I mean, I would have to research what the original intent of that was. There were some carryovers from previous advertising modes.
Sure.
And I can't say that I recall in town a display case of 20 square feet or even anything close to that. But perhaps people
It just to
may
me,
have
it
wanted
just
those.
stuck out. I don't have a problem with
Yeah.
it. It just stuck out to me.
Okay.
Is it a good idea just to leave it open though? Because what if you do need a bigger space and then have to go back to, modifications? I don't know. Yeah, it sounds like a big display case, but, yeah.
Are we allowed to have comment from the public with?
Sure. Joni, do you have some input on this point?
There are some.
You want to come up, Joni? So you're sorry. You need to be recorded for posterity.
Yes, ma'am. There's an alleyway near Ingeborg's Chocolate that goes back into some interior shops, and right along that wall, there's quite an expansive glass showcase. So I think what they tried to do was make sure that was legal.
Oh, so after the fact.
It was after the fact.
Well,
Yeah, and it's been there forever. It's not like it's something new that popped up.
I wouldn't necessarily advise a shrinking of that square footage, because perhaps there will be courtyards or larger
Yeah.
commercial centers that they want to consolidate information in one space.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't
think 20
recommend
is-
it on the front of the building, but on those little pathways that go back, I think they're kind of a good use.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you for that
there's
information.
Rules and regulations about what can go on the front of the building anyway, so I don't think that would be a problem. Anything else?
May I take advantage of having your former person who
Certainly.
worked on this to ask one of the things that jumped out at me? I'm just curious, there's actually a whole, in that same area, it's O, which sets a different standard for churches, private schools, and other facilities similar in nature, which just struck me as odd that churches and schools have a lesser ability to have signs than other things, and I'm not sure that's allowed, but I'm just curious what it was that somebody was trying to get at.
Okay, I think what that refers to is that schools are not regulated by the town in which they are located. They are regulated by the state of California. So that's what we have to go back to their rules and regs to find out what we are capable of doing at schools. And I don't know about churches. I don't know anything about churches, why that's there. But I know with schools, when we were going to when we built the gymnasium, and I was on the construction committee, we had to make sure that we did things according to what the state would allow us in public schools. And some of them were different than what the city would allow. So maybe that's why that's there.
I would
Private
just
schools.
suggest, when this comes back, you may want to have staff look at that and reconsider. I'm not sure that you can, in fact, tell a church that they can't have lettering more than 3 inches in height.
I think I'll have the city attorney help me and assist me in that review, since that is definitely a legal area that I would like some assistance with. So
And anything else, Chip, that you found?
I would just make a general comment, and this is that I'm learning it about Solvang general comment. It strikes me as extraordinarily verbose, but that's just it's mostly a stylistic comment. I mean, I find things that are just, it's same thing is said 3 or 4 times in just a slightly different way throughout
Yes,
the
I found
document.
that too, but actually, I think Holly has made a pretty good attempt at eliminating a lot of that. And we talked about a couple of things this morning that I found as well. So, but I think that's a good point, that you don't have to keep saying the same thing over and over again.
Holly, what brought this on? It looks like you streamlined it a lot from what it was before. I mean, and I think making it
Yes.
easier for people to go through the process and
Yes.
trying to clean it up, it makes sense.
yes,
But
yes to all of those.
Okay.
We intended to have this as a larger package, a work product
Okay.
that would involve a design professional and those who specialize in this type of work. But it became apparent that it was going to be a little too much and a little too much work for the design firms that contacted me, and so we pulled back and decided that for the time being, we were able to take a run at doing some quick changes to answer some concerns of council and also of some of the business community to make this an easier process, especially when it came to some easy things like relocating signs, approving those, making clear that there's a temporary sign process that people can jump into right away. They don't have to wait for a BAR meeting to put a sign out for their business. And just cleaning up some general verbiage that, as I say, some of this is style and fashion, and that some of the advertising the coverage that was in here, about sign coverage that was in here, did not seem as relevant to our community for today. So that was excised. But mostly is that we have, the bones, we have the structure to administratively approve signs now. We just needed to make it available to applicants and know that they could have the ones that were clearly identified in the sign ordinance. We were going to be able to move on quickly. So that's really what
It's a lot of work. I mean, you had to go through all that.
it was a lot of work. Yes. Well, and there was a fair amount of discussion, especially between Brenda and I, because Brenda really has been the one to review signs for at least 3 years, perhaps, for the BAR. So she's well versed in what comes over the counter and some of the pros and cons of bringing that in administratively. I think we're also aware of the fact that we are now the determiners of that, and there is an appeal process that people feel like that we have not given them the decision that they deserve. So that is that's an avenue that people could take if they're not pleased with the decision. So thank you, though. Appreciate that.
With respect to the BAR, since it was brought up, are there any plans to allow the BAR to review this before it goes to the city council? I'm not sure who I should address that question to.
You're looking at me, so I'll be happy to answer it.
Okay.
We did not have plans to take this update or this amendment to the BAR, simply because what this amendment is doing is really just implementing the standards that are already identified in the ordinance. And so what this really was, as Commissioner Rodriguez pointed out, was really just a streamlining, an ability to give a business owner or someone who has a sign that's already fully in compliance, their application, we see that it's fully in compliance, and we can move on providing them authorization to get their sign made and get it hung on their building. When we get into the design guidelines component, where it's much more about style and fit and those factors that will guide what is or is not an allowable sign, then absolutely we'll have the BAR involved, because they are the architectural review board that's going to be fundamental in providing input on what those signs look like and other design elements as well.
Okay. Thank you. You brought up the design guidelines, which reminds me, in the design guidelines, I think it says that the BAR is supposed to review all signs. We're changing that here.
I did do a little
Can we
research on your question, Jack,
Make
on
that
that.
change without changing the design guidelines as well?
Jack and I discussed the design guidelines that states in E3, village area signs. It's in your staff report on page 2. All sign applications are to be reviewed by the Board of Architectural Review. And I believe that I had referenced that I thought the former assistant city attorney had made a determination that we could take an ordinance back to make wholesale changes to all the city documents. And I did find that reference on February 11th, 2019. He made that statement. So that was a direction that was given by the previous city attorney, and I'm sure that Chip would have some opinion on whether or not that can be done as just a wholesale sign ordinance change. For instance, if you're making the change where the BAR is referenced in a city planning document, you could change that as well as the sign ordinance at the same time.
So do I understand you to say that you could accept these changes and change every place else the BAR appears in ordinances all at the same time?
That was
Without having
that was
to
what
review
that was
each one separately?
Yes. That was what I was told by the previous assistant city attorney. So.
Does that,
I would just ask that we find all those other changes and have an ordinance that goes to the council where we include all of those references and cross changes.
okay.
Yeah, and I would just say, for the planning commission purposes, you could certainly provide that direction and input that staff do that before it goes back to the council.
I will do that. So does that bring up any other discussion? Aaron, you just got here. Do you
Yeah, I
have any-
apologize. I thought it was sort of 6:30. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just sitting over at Chomp doing nothing. So you may have spoke to it. I guess we just had staff report is what that was, and now this is just questions to staff. So, City Council, help me out, has decided that they want the BAR out of the sign process, or are they deciding with our input to take the BAR out of the sign ordinance process? And I reference back to when Jack and I were here a year ago about right now with the medical marijuana. City Council said, hey, Planning Commission, you guys go decide, take a look at where you want to have a zone for medical marijuana in the city. We voted 5-0. We don't want medical marijuana in the city. Take a breath and relax. Went back to City Council. City Council said, no, 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 no. We're telling you we're going to have it. Just pick the zone. And we were shocked and taken back. We had another meeting and said, well, if a gun is to our head, I think I was quoted in the paper as saying that, then I guess we'll pick a zone. And we picked a zone, and we came and spoke at City Council, and we admonished and said, wow, you're probably opening yourself up to a lot of issues, perhaps even lawsuits. You need a process in place before you pick a zone. You haven't even done your application process. Sure enough, that's where we are now with the process. I only reference that as to where are we in this? Is this a gun to our head that City Council has decided BR is no longer involved in the sign ordinance, or is that the discussion right now? And if it is that they've decided that, did they ever have a public hearing on whether that is the way that the city wants to go, or did they just decide it in a vacuum? And I thought it was at the meeting where I thought it was more, hey, let's look at doing this. Gosh, there was discussions about doing away with the BAR, and people came out in droves and said, don't do away with the BAR. So then it's, well, let's just take away the sign power of the BAR. Let's leave them with the design guidelines. But we want to look at the design guidelines also, as you just referenced, so the staff has some guidelines. But we're going to take it away from the BAR and have it on staff without the design guidelines. City Attorney Chip says absolutely. It needs to be dovetailed together, because how does staff do that until we have design guidelines? I'm not understanding the rush. I'm not understanding the process. I'm not understanding much of it. And I've been on BAR for 8 years, Planning Commission for 12 years. I own businesses, and I'm a landlord of 30 or 40 properties. I don't understand the need. It's not broken. Why are we trying to fix it? I don't get it. Now, I'm just one guy sitting up here saying I don't understand it, and I'm trying to understand the process. If it's we're going to do this, you guys just help us go through. I'm happy to go, you missed a dot, and you should have crossed a T, and that should be A8 instead of A9. We could spend 19 hours doing this. Or is it we're looking at the process and we have some influence? Obviously, it wasn't this city council that took away our rights to talk about medical marijuana. It was the previous city council. So I'm not criticizing the city council. It was the previous one that said, we're not listening to you folks, even though you were 5-0. We're going to do what we want to do, and you pick the darn zone. So I don't understand our role in this, I suppose, unless it's to dot I's and cross T's. I'm happy to do that, and that would take us, not tonight. I could go through this thing page by page, or are we having a general discussion on should the BAR be involved with the signed ordinance? Which obviously, I think from my tone, you can tell that I believe the BAR should be involved with the signed ordinance, and I could, during our discussion period, go and speak for hours on that as to why it's so important to have a BAR in the city of Solvang. But this is more of a question of staff more than it is my position.
Understood, and thank you for the question. There's been a couple of conversations. Before I arrived in April, I was paying attention to some of the council meetings, and I did, from afar online, watch the council meeting where there was discussion about elimination of the BAR. Now, at the June 22nd City Council goal-setting session, one of the conversations, and actually the goal, another important goal that the City Council did create was create a master plan for Solvang's future. And one of the subcomponents of that was options to streamline and make more transparent the functions of BAR, Planning Commission, and Development Review, and expedite updates of design and sign standards. And so under that guidance, or at least that, that identification as a goal for the City Council, we have been in the process of looking at the sign code and have brought this forward. Now, we went a little bit out of sequence from what is the prototypical standard zoning modification, and that we took the draft language that is identified for you in your packet to City Council first. We took that in July, recognizing that the City Council had expressed some interest in having a conversation on sign streamlining. In the budget, the adopted budget, there is the funding for the design guidelines update, and I know that that was something that prior to my arrival, an RFP had been issued, as Holly referenced, and I think there was some $50,000 or $55,000 in the prior fiscal year budget that provided for a design guideline and sign code update, sort of as a joint RFP. That's where I understand from Holly, she can speak to it better than me, but there was practically no interest from any planning firms to come in and do that work because of the combination of those two factors. So what's before you now is really an attempt to try to strike that balance between understanding that the design guidelines that really is the document and are the standards that guide the flavor and the look and the feel of signage in Solvang, as well as other architectural look and feel, is the purview. That's where the BAR is maintaining under this modification for anything that would be outside of just strictly identified. It's got to be on, a 2 square foot board with 3-inch lettering. That's, the maximum 3 lines of text or whatever those specificities may be. And so in bringing this back to you with it not going to the BAR, what this is trying to do is to provide an opportunity for over-the-counter approvals for signage for applicants that meet what is otherwise detailed from a specification standard in the provisions of the sign code. Now, the overall style of the signage, I agree, is going to be addressed under the design guidelines, and at that point in time, if there is then need for us to come back and make further modifications of the sign code, then we will do that. But we're trying to work on implementing some streamlining efforts here where we thought possible administratively based on the direction from City Council.
And again, I'm absolutely in favor of looking at the design guidelines of the city and of the signs. That's part of the whole design guidelines. It just seems like it's a cart before the horse. You do that, whether we have a BAR or whether we have staff do it, you need the design guidelines. So we get into and we say, eliminate the BAR. Now we look at the design guidelines and we go, wow, we really need a BAR to maybe implement this subjectivity, which is what a design guidelines is. Golly, but we just did away with the BAR looking at it. I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm lost on this process. And I'm really involved in stuff, and I've been involved with stuff, and I really don't get the process. And I have not chatted with anybody on City Council other than I was at the meeting when I was panicked, and then they kicked it to us, and I thought, okay, they at least kicked it to us to take a look at, is that what we want to do or not? And I'm not faulting staff in any way, shape, or form, because staff is dictated by a city council trying to understand what they want you folks to do. And I applaud what you did. A lot of the streamlining, the benches, the over-the-counter, the temporary, the relocation, all that stuff we've talked about for years, we need to change, whether it's a BAR or whether it's a staff. So anyway, I'm happy to give my opinion when we get to that, but that's the nature of my question.
Well, and I apologize if I wasn't clear there. Planning Commission, you do get to have this conversation and make recommendations to the City Council. So if there are issues that you find or that the Planning Commission finds with it, then that's certainly direction we will take back to the City Council when we return with anything to them.
So before you got here and we were talking about the BAR, and it's really not being completely cut out of the process here. It's still there for appeals and what have you. Perhaps it should be codified in here that the planning department can request a hearing on a sign before the BAR to cover things like you were talking about, David, color and style, the vernacular, that sort of thing that, that may not and probably does not fall in their area of expertise.
Well,
If we're just talking about the size of the sign and the location on the building, I don't see there's any problem with
but we're
staff
not.
doing that.
It's saying
That's
staff
what
will do everything. And regarding appeals, again, not any way, shape, or form criticizing staff, but it allows an appeal for any interested person. Well, the only interested person is the person who makes the application, because the neighbors never get noticed because you don't have a hearing in front of the BAR. So no one's ever going to appeal it until the purple sign goes up, and then I go, holy criminy, how did I not know that? Because we don't have a hearing. All we have is the only person that can appeal is the applicant who didn't like that he didn't get his purple sign. So again, I could nitpick this thing apart, being an attorney, and go through this thing. That to me seems like down the road, we ought to have the discussion of overall, is that the way that the city is going, is to eliminate the BAR out of the process of approving signs? Unless that's been decided at city council, which it doesn't sound like. It sounds like they're giving it to us to have this discussion.
I've only been around since June the 19th. I went to a hearing. I did not hear the council tell the planning commission to not follow the normal process. Again, the normal process would be for the planning commission to provide complete review and input, including on whether or not you like the idea of staff approval of certain signs, or you want them to all go to the BAR, or you would like to not have the color purple in the city at all. I think that is all entirely within the purview of what the council is asking for your input on.
Thank you.
So, do we want to give them some input? I think and I'll give you my opinion, I think the BAR should be more involved than what this calls out for. If this is coming as city direction, is that city council directions, that this is what they want, as Aaron points out, that's a different story. But on the surface, I would prefer to see the BAR involvement, and perhaps look at ways of, since everybody talks about streamlining and transparency, especially with the BAR, I don't understand where that's not happening now. If you recall, when this came up, when was it, back in June or before that, there were very few, if any, people who got up and said, you know, we really hate the BAR, we need to get rid of it. In fact, there were several people that got up and said they do a great job and they were a big help, and we appreciate that we can come in ahead of time with and review things and get some direction, and then come back for a final approval later, rather than having to keep coming back. So on that basis, I would suggest that we try to keep the involvement of the BAR as much as possible, and maybe look at more particular ways rather than across the board ways of giving staff more responsibility. Just my thoughts.
In a big picture, and this will be my soapbox, City of Solvang is based on tourism, and the reason we have tourists is for a number of reasons. I would say probably the majority of the reasons is because of our design. We don't have an ocean, we don't have a ski mountain, we don't have a lake. What we have is we have a European village, kind of Northern European, that started that way with Northern European designs and hopefully subtle signs, subtle benches, subtle designs that people don't get in Lompoc, LA, Santa Monica, Santa Barbara, different places that don't have a strict sign ordinance. We are selling design. We're selling experience. You know, you hear Michael Mendiza stand up at all those chamber meetings and talk about people are coming for retail for the experience. They're not just coming, you can buy on Amazon, whatever you want. They come for experience. That's what they're doing. And when they come here and they squint and they look at our town and they go, wow, you guys all hear it. We're all around it. It's my gosh, I wish I could live here. Why? It's so clean, it's so neat, it's so pretty, it's so consistently good. It's something totally different. So I've had people say to me, gosh, other places don't have a BAR that looks at signs. And I go, I don't care. Why would that even affect me? Other places don't have a Northern European village that was started at the turn of the century. And still, we have millions of people come and employ tens of thousands of people in our industries throughout, and brings in millions of dollars. 60%, 70% of our revenue comes from TOT and sales tax. And I can tell you that hotels would put their hotel on I-5 in the middle of a desert. Why not? It's cheaper. They don't want to be there. They want to be where the beach is, the mountain is, the lake is, and the city of Solvang is. That's where they want to be. Otherwise, we'd all be putting hotels and businesses out where there isn't this design that makes everyone feel warm and fuzzy. So as corny as it sounds, that's what we do. That's what we sell. We're a Disneyland in that sense of the word, yet we all live here. So anything we can do to keep our designs tighter and transparent. When people talk about it's going to be more transparent if staff does it, I totally disagree. That it's going to be, no offense to staff and Brenda, it's going to be Brenda and me sitting there looking at a sign. That's not transparent. Nobody even knows about it. That's me and Brenda. Just she likes me, doesn't like me. She agrees, she doesn't agree. She lets me do things or not. Going to the DMV, believe me, they want to be objective. I believe you put staff on a lie detector, they would say, dear God, don't let me decide the green. Let a 5-member board that's the public that you see them at Valley Fresh or at New Frontiers decide that we didn't like your green or we didn't like your letters or we didn't. Let the public have that input. And city council gets to pick that public, those 5 members, just like they pick us, and they can pick who they want, and we have people on there that are responsible, and that's when the Lansby gets painted white. Staff didn't decide it. That's the Peterson Inn. We got ripped as a family. Guess what? The BAR is the one that decided to let it be painted all white. It wasn't staff. Thank goodness. They dodged every arrow in the world. Now, I'm not criticizing. It's back. That's just one example. We could go on and on and on. So I think the importance of our little town of having 12 meetings a year, which costs probably $1,000 a meeting, is a pittance for what could happen if staff, no offense, takes it over, and oh my gosh, you got to decide, and people are yelling and screaming and pounding the table. They're doing it already for staff on things, much less a subjective color variation sign. To me, it would be horrific to do in the city of Solvang. I've probably been as adamant as I can be about it because that is our value. That is the crux of what we are. To even discuss it seems streamlining. I get it. There's a few things, and I'm happy to talk about that. But to do away with BR, I don't understand the reason. It ain't broke. Why try to fix it? I've gotten lots of signs done. You can get things over the counter for immediate, and then you get a temporary, and then you get your permanent. You can appeal it. People can have input, and it's the most friendly. I don't know if anyone, and I'm not criticizing the city council, has been through a BAR process. I don't think any of them have. I don't think so. I've been through 30 of them personally, and then on the other side. And there's a lot of us that have been. It's an easy process. It's not a difficult process, in my opinion.
Aaron, I hear what you're saying in that regard, and I understand. I respect your passion, and I also respect the role that the BR has played and will continue to play in the city. While we did have a discussion about some verbiage, 1113.5 now is the sign permits, application and processing procedures. D would with this slight change that was suggested by Commissioner Williams earlier, the appeals process it would be perhaps a little less direct, but if you remove the line as made by planning staff, it would read, an applicant or any interested person may appeal decisions concerning sign applications as follows. that a person could be, you could add a line there, or make it clear that the planning director may refer any such signs to the BAR if there's a belief that what is being asked for is not, is not something that the planning director could be to make a comfortable determination on. One would think that at this point, the easier, simpler actions that could be taken should be taken in terms of sign approval. But if we get to a situation internally as staff where we need to have a body review and make recommendations and approve that language should be in there more clearly than it is now. So.
I'm curious, if we were to, and I may be asking you to guess here, but maybe you know, if this goes through, if we get it cleaned up and come back and approve it, and it goes to the city council and they approve basically these changes as they are proposed, how much time would actually be saved by the customer as opposed to what they're currently doing?
Well, I believe that the scenario that justified this particular action was that a new business opens up on the Friday after the Thursday meeting, or they missed the deadline by one day for the BAR hearing. They need to wait the 30 days and then receive their approval, or it needs to be reviewed again, possibly. In the times that I think Brenda can address some of this, in the times that she has been at the BAR, I don't know how many signs have actually had to come back for a second review after recommendations were made. It's certainly been a handful that I recall in 3 years, which would be a delay. But would they get that anyway? A redesign request from staff, if it was just administrative? One would hope that there would be some consistency in interpreting our guidelines as written.
My experience of Brecky's, I opened it, came in, got a temporary sign. I wanted to get open. The thing I closed quickly. There was no way to get to BAR. I got temporary signs. But I had to do it within a certain amount of time to get my application in for my permanent signs. Or Brenda would have said, take your temporary signs down. There's a process in place. If not, codify it and make it even better. So I could get open with my signs, drop some coin on that to then get my permanent signs. Again, it ain't broke. I don't know what, to answer your question, Jack, I don't know what we would be saving. And in fact, we might take it might be worse because staff would look at it and, with all due respect, then we have an issue with it, then take it to BAR. So we go through staff and then staff goes, ooh, you got to go to BAR anyway with some of these, and then they're saying, well, why would that be? I mean, I just, again, I disagree with the logic.
And as far as if that's all we're doing is speeding things up, with the example you gave where somebody misses the BAR meeting by a day or two, there's nothing that says that we can't have BAR meetings twice a month if needed.
Or temporary signs.
And we can have temporary signs are in here already.
That's
So,
true, yes.
I'm not sure, other than making the wording better and getting rid of redundancies and what have you, I'm not sure that turning everything over to staff is the right thing to do, especially since they have a lot of work to do anyway. I mean, we're adding to their workload.
There is a review process that Brenda performs before every BAR meeting, which is fairly lengthy no matter what. She gives a lot of advice over the counter and will give recommendations. We really do work hard, not only in presenting materials to the BAR, but also to Planning Commission, to make sure we've got a lot of that stuff ironed out before you even see it. And so she, I think in terms of the workload, yes, there's more responsibility that's being proposed here. But in terms of the workload, it's, I would let Brenda speak to that if she has any insights. Got a microphone there.
Thank you, Planning Commission. To touch on some of your questions from previously, since I started working for the City of Solvang September of 2015, I have, I believe, only one sign that's ever been continued to a following meeting. A handful were continued for the applicant not showing up to the meeting. A lot of the advice given by the BAR is to work with staff to get to a better product, whether it's submitting a different red color chip or a slightly different font style, and then leaving it up to staff to make that determination at the staff level for approval. Again, like Holly mentioned, I do go over the signs every submittal that comes in. I know Aaron and I have had some conversations. Hey, Aaron, you're missing your paint chips, and BAR is not going to take your application if we don't have those items. So we have a very good relationship with the sign contractors that we see a lot of the time. There's a handful in the valley that we see most often, and they're very familiar with our process. The two that we see most often, they don't seem to have an issue with the process because they know that they can come in for a temporary sign for a business. And there's a handful of businesses throughout Solvang that operate without signage, and they're still doing good. I think that we've been trying to be very reasonable with applicants at the counter, trying to get them to a yes answer. I see both sides. I see what the Planning Commission is saying. I understand what the council is saying. I understand that there is streamlining that could be done. I'm excited for the revamp of the sign ordinance because of the inaccuracies that are throughout the ordinance. So that cleanup, to me, it will be beneficial for me to help applicants in the future. And anyway, I'm here if you have any other questions.
As far as like the purple sign and all that stuff, isn't there guidelines already in place for those kinds of things, or?
We have design guidelines which haven't been looked at for decades, I'm telling you. And it says, Northern European colors. What are Northern European colors? I mean, that's the design guideline needs to have an update, whether it's through the RFP and an outside source or whether it's us. We all agree. I mean, we agreed a year ago. We were trying to get that done. Then the election came along and let's put it on hold. And that needs to be looked at so that it really helps staff and helps an applicant be able to decide what it is. We've gone from flat signs being okay to carved signs to being okay to being flat signs again to being carved signs, and we need to solidify some of those, codify it better so that staff and applicants don't have such a blink. I would agree when you get to BAR, they work with them and the staff works with all my tenants all the time, and as a landlord I do, but my tenants do, and it seems to go fairly smooth. Fairly smooth, as far as I know. So the design guidelines separate from tightening up our sign ordinance, separate from the process of the sign ordinance, is the process, the BAR staff. Then you have the sign guidelines, square footage, and how many can you have, and how much feet off the sidewalk, 7 feet, and this and that, and 7 square feet, and the design guidelines. So it's really three things that need to be looked at to make it tighter. Anyway.
That's not encompassed in here at all right now?
Not in the sign ordinance, it's in the design
In the
guidelines.
design guidelines, and even there, it says like Northern European colors. What is a Northern European color? I was talking to a friend who just came back from Denmark, and I asked him that question because he said, well, he saw a lot of greens and light blues and yellows and reds. I don't see that in Solvang at all. I see white and brown. We're a pretty homogeneous town, which should probably change, but that's a function of the BAR and the customers, the people who are painting their
Well,
buildings.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most cities don't have a design guideline as part of the general plan. Is that
We
true?
are unique in having a
unique. We
community
have a
design element as part
design
of
element.
of
Yeah.
the general plan.
Because
Yes,
people
that's
don't
true.
care. We've said that's how important design is to our town. It's in our general plan. To change that is a general plan change. It's a big deal to get in and do that. It needs to be tackled and done to update. And then this is just the process, the objective process, and then who interprets the design guidelines. The staff interprets the objective square footage. BAR has always traditionally interpreted the design guidelines because it's subjective rather than objective.
Aaron, I hear what you're saying about the big task needed to update that. They both those elements were done in 1988. That was a long time ago. And that is precisely why we wanted to have a consultant team come and assist us with the high-powered graphics, with some community meetings, really to bear down on that and make sure that it's as up to date, flexible, online, and also that we have the ability to change it over time, which is something that is forgotten about sometimes when you get into these big design documents. Is that if you don't ask for the ownership of that material, it becomes difficult later to change that. That said, I know we've been given council direction to look at this process as a whole. And perhaps an alternative, and I hear what you're saying about the BAR and the importance of their role. Perhaps an alternative would be for staff to come back with in advance with some proposed interim materials that would be colors and signage brochures that you could see and review as planning commission to get us a little farther into that, to experiment with that step. And then wait until the update for the design guidelines to see what the role is, if that's working for staff, and then what the role would be for the BAR going forward, because the design guidelines is the BAR reference. I mean, it's throughout, and that's, they deserve to. That's a larger community conversation, in my view, which would come with an update process.
I think that Commissioner Williams had a great point about the timing. And if somebody missed a meeting, how long they would have to wait for the next one. I am absolutely and 100% in favor of streamlining the position. And I'm grateful that you took the time and you cut out 11 full pages from this pile. It is not uncommon to hear that Solvang is not the easiest place to start a business or create something. But by doing this, it is making life a little bit easier. It is making it easier to streamline and get on the fast track to open that business and excuse me, and get those signage up. I was lucky enough to be on the BAR for a short term, and I found a lot of value on being on the BAR, and I know that most of our time was talking about signage. I'm glad that it wasn't up to solely one person, because I believe too that you need to have the conversation to make sure that there is continuity and consistency throughout the town. We live in a special place, and we have to keep that. We have to keep that that continuity there. So I believe that there is an answer. I think that the bar does have a lot of value. This just seems like a stopgap measure anyway, though. This is just like a temporary until the whole process gets refined. You said it was since 1988, since it was all refined.
That's right,
So
and the community design element, yes. So, stopgap, it may be the answer at this point. What I hear you all saying is that there's value in a deeper dive into the design guidelines and the community design element. That's not gonna happen next month. We'll have to hire the appropriate resources, I think, to have that community conversation and get the results that we need, the flexibility, the updating, the clear path that outsiders can follow, and staff for that matter, and future councils. The role of the BAR and Planning Commission is still a topic that has not been finalized with council. So for a stopgap measure, I would recommend that we experiment with this. We come back with a cleaned up version. First of all, taking care of all the T's and the crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and then nomenclature. If you're good with old world vernacular, we run with that. We make sure that the planning director has the ability to refer to the BAR. If there's something that appears particularly controversial or in need of a larger audience, but in the meantime, perhaps we can get something where we can all agree that perhaps these are the colors that would be acceptable for the short term. These would be the sign types, the font, and we could see how this works as an in-house exercise. We have the experience, we have the staff experience, and I think to try it would be useful for everybody.
Well, again, it ain't broke. Why are we trying to fix it? And I don't understand the expediency of it, of getting it done. And with all due respect, let's try it. You open a business. Somebody opens a business in October, and we've tried it. We've given them a new sign. That sign's up for maybe 30 years. And the neighbor goes, "How come he got it?" Well, because we were trying it for 6 months or 9 months. As city council was trying to decide whether we do the design guidelines or not. Well, what were the design guidelines? Well, the old one, but kind of the new one, kind of the old one, new. We're talking livelihoods. We're talking a big deal here as to what people have their rights to do. And my opinion is we wait. We get our design guidelines in place with some input from the public. City council, the BAR has to be involved, obviously, us and just the public in general as to what we want to do with our design guidelines. If that takes 6 months or a year, it doesn't matter. We've been doing this since '88, and they're pretty darn good, and everyone's interpreted them pretty well, and I don't hear a lot of complaints. I just don't hear it. And I got a pulse beat out there, as you guys do. We're around all kinds of people all the time. The process seems to be working. So let the process do its direct course, which is design guidelines. And then part of that design guidelines is the process of who approves it. Again, some of us would think BAR, some would not think BAR, some do. And that will be part of that whole design guidelines. The tighter we can make the design guidelines, the less you need a BAR. I would agree, right? If we can make it really ironclad and tight, it should be simple. Right now, it's willy-nilly. You need those subjective 5 people to make those decisions or help you make those decisions and help staff make those decisions so they're not, villainized by people. I just think it's cart before a horse. Time out. Let's get our design guidelines, which we were hoping to have done last year, as we all know. We all chatted about it, a year and a half ago or something. We got, much times, and no fault of anyone other than the timing of everything that went on. And come on, it's been a crazy year. I mean, city council's got they're riding a wild horse. They're getting sewers and waters, and they got so much going on. This doesn't seem to be a priority, I guess, when we get so many other things that are coming down the pike with the state and what we have to be doing. But anyway, that's, again, my
Mr.
opinion.
Chair, may I suggest
go ahead.
perhaps something? I think that I'm hearing at least a majority of you who are not in favor at this time of making what might actually be a kind of a search and return. But I'm also hearing from Brenda that there are some changes to the sign ordinance that she's identified as a practical matter that would be really helpful for continuing to implement the sign ordinance. So perhaps staff could bring back to you, and again, I'm hearing that everywhere where it used to say BAR, you'd like it to still say BAR, but that the other changes probably are helpful. The shortening of it would be helpful. Am I getting the gist of what
Yes,
the
thank
commission
you. In
is
fact,
saying? And could the staff then
was-
bring that back to you in that
I
fashion?
was going to almost use those same words.
Thank you.
We can keep those 11 pages and 2,000 words to the side then.
Yeah, in other
Absolutely.
words, start from here, but leave in the references that were there for the BAR, but don't throw away all the work that you've done, because
Sure.
I think we all agree that work is good.
Certainly,
valuable.
thank you. Well, and that will extend the community conversation, and from what I hear you saying, that is a value at this point. So I would look forward to that continuing on September 3rd. That's our next meeting. That's a Tuesday because Monday's a holiday. So that would be my recommendation at this point, and I'm grateful to Mr. Wilbrandt for offering that up. And we will take that direction if that is
Do we
what
need
you
a
agree.
motion to do that, or can we just give staff direction?
I'm gonna suggest that you do that in the form of a motion and direction to staff. I think keeping the record clear on this would be good.
Anybody want to make a motion?
How do we word that?
I believe that you could have a motion which is to direct staff to return on September the 3rd with an updated version of the ordinance, returning all of those references that the previous ordinance had to review by BAR back to review by BAR, but with the other changes that have been presented to you this evening.
So moved.
Okay, so moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second that, yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 4-0.
Thank you.
Is there anything else we need to cover tonight? Any other?
I have no comments, planning director comments at this time. I think you've probably been aware of some of the activity in town. We've got a couple of projects that have come in recently for submittal. We're hoping to see a little activity over at Solvang Suites. A new contractor has taken over the permit, so we're hopeful. Solvang Suites, it's the water wheel, the 425 First Street. I think you've seen also, we are submittal for 539 Alisol recently too, that is it's just in almost the pre-application process at this point too. So that'll be a residential proposal.
With that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.